I've been here for a long, long time. Most of my ministry has been working with the gospel. So my job was to make sure that we have the readings for Lent. And that's been confirmed. So we are going to go through the 5 weeks of Lent with the appointed readings. And then, of course, the highlight of this is to see how the artists have depicted the readings. And that's where Jim comes in, who wears many hats here at St. Thomas, but also is an art historian. So he's bringing his love of art and his expertise into this program. Take it away.
Yes, it's really good to work with Ginger because, as she said, she leads a Bible study and she's worked on discussing and delving into the gospel readings. And so again, what you have in front of you is a list of the readings that we will have through Lent. So this is the next 5 weeks. So what we're going to do is look at Luke. It's Luke for 4 weeks and then John in the 5th week. And we'll read them out loud. And then we'll look at some artists' interpretations of those particular passages. And you can then refer back to your text. So what we're doing is words and images, right? Different ways of getting at the truth of the Gospels through words and images. So what you're looking at on the screen is in the Brooklyn Museum. It's a gouache on paper by James Tissot from 1894. And it's Jesus in the Wilderness. So, Ginger, we're going to have somebody read this first one. So Frank has agreed to read this.
Frank, Sarah, reader number 1.
Would you like the mic?
I don't think I
Okay.
Luke 4:1-13. And Jesus, full of the Holy Spirit, returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit for 40 days in the wilderness, tempted by the devil. And he ate nothing in those days. And when they were ended, he was hungry. The devil said to him, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, man shall not live by bread alone." And the devil took him up and showed him all of the kingdoms of the world in that moment of time, and said to him, "To you I will give all of this authority and their glory, for it has been delivered to me, and I give it to whom I will. If you then will worship me, it shall be all yours." And Jesus answered him, "It is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." And he took him to Jerusalem and set him on a pinnacle of the temple, and said to him, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself down from here, for it is written, he will give his angels charge of you and guard you, and on their hands they will bear you up, lest you strike your foot against a stone." And Jesus answered him, "It is said, you shall not tempt the Lord your God." And when the devil had ended every temptation, he departed from him until an opportune time.
So, that's what we heard today. And James Tissot is showing us here in this opaque watercolor, maybe the exact quote, "If you are the Son of God, command this stone to become bread." looks rather paltry is kind of offering up stones that could be turned into bread. And behind them, you see the wilderness. Again, the title is Jesus Tempted in the Wilderness. Here's another version. Now you're again looking at late 19th century. If we go back a few centuries, this is an artist named Juan de Flandes, Flandes, and it's from early Renaissance, right? 1504. A frame of reference, this is the same, the Mona Lisa painted at this time. Michelangelo's David around this time. You see a landscape, atmospheric perspective, right? The distance is painted hazy, so things far away are less distinct or hazier. That's atmospheric perspective. We're looking through atmosphere. You also see at the right middle ground, there's kind of a meandering path. Can you make that out from where you are? It goes back, meandering into the distance at the right side. And that's actually in the Mona Lisa too. If you can think of it, there's a path that goes back. It's a way the Renaissance artists have the illusion of depth. But in the foreground, there's Jesus kind of, again, turning down the devil. He's here shown with horns. And I don't know if you can see it, but the 1 foot of the devil protruding from beneath his garment, can you see that? It looks kind of like what? Like it's webbed. It looks like a big, I don't know, duck foot or something.
Lizard. A lizard.
Like a lizard, yeah. I think also kind of the same passage. And here's a print by an artist named Gustave Doré, D-O-R-E, and it's The Temptation of Christ. It's about 1865. And what's this? Which moment is this?
You want all this kingdom.
Right, all the kingdom can be yours, and you see that below, as if it's the devil's to give. And Jesus, Doré doesn't paint him with kind of a Renaissance halo. He just has light emanating from his head, so he seems to have a halo of light. Going back even farther, this is from the early 14th century, so very early Renaissance by Duccio, spelled D-U-C-C-I-O, Duccio, and it's The Temptation of Christ on the Mountain. And it's a tempera on panel. It's at the Frick collection in New York. And what do we see here, right? This is pre-Renaissance, so figures are huger than buildings, right? They're more important, so they're bigger. But the buildings represent, again, all the kingdoms in the world. All this can be yours. And Jesus rejects that. This was, I was reading about this. This is one panel of many. There was over 50 panels in a program of the life of Jesus, right? It was an altarpiece. There were wings that folded back with paintings on both sides, a predella that goes beneath. It was in Siena, and it was there for hundreds of years. And Duccio was kind of a model for early Renaissance and Renaissance artists depicting the life of Christ. Then it was dismantled, and this panel is now a separate painting. And the Frick owns just this. But it was originally designed by the artist as one of many panels showing the life of Christ. And, you know, the other thing I want to say is we're looking at things that are wildly distorted, right? This thing is 17 inches by 18 inches. So you think of it as this giant painting, but it's actually quite small. It's a tempera paint on panel with some gold leaf. And here you see the halo behind Jesus is kind of one of those, kind of a disc, like a plate behind his head. So jumping back to the 19th century, again late 19th century, this is 1898, the temptation in the wilderness. By an artist named Breton Riviere. And if you think of Jesus, right, we heard about him, 40 days in the desert without eating, you think of the exhaustion, right? The human side of Jesus would feel exhausted. Any sign of the devil in this? Anybody? Well, there's a little star. This is morning light, right? There's one last star there, and some readers have, or some viewers of this have depicted that as the devil just about to disappear. I guess Lucifer means something to do with light, which is kind of ironic since Jesus is the light of the world. But tempted by the devil, exhausted by the situation.
Jim, why do you think that that's morning instead of evening? The feeling I get is, you know, the exhaustion and getting set for another hard night.
I guess because of the star still being there. But I guess it could be evening too. I just read interpretations of it saying that, but I don't know for sure.
One or the other.
So there's also a discussion about about Jerusalem. So I'm going to show you a slide here of the city, an image of the city, a print of the city, and we'll have the second reading. Again, you can refer to your sheet, which Ginger prepared, and this is the second week.
Yeah, I forgot who I asked to read.
Who is going to read
How
it?
could you forget me?
You're number 2?
Yes.
Oh, very
wait,
Can
good.
I try with my regular voice?
Yeah.
Can you hear me? Shall I read?
Yes.
Okay,
So,
Luke 13, 31 to 35. At that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today and tomorrow, and the third day I finish my course. Nevertheless, I must go on my way today and tomorrow and the day following. For it cannot be that a prophet should perish away from Jerusalem. O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to you."
I believe that that's at the length of 4.5 football fields. And that the highest building would be a 45-foot skyscraper today. So this is an enormous proportion. And then this is the courtyard. So this whole open space on the left and on the right is called the Gentile court or the women's court. So everybody had access to that outside part, but they could go no further. So not only could the Gentiles not go in, but neither could the women. So they were in this open open space, but they could not go any further. And then as you see our viewpoint, you had to be more qualified to keep going in. So the priest could go in that first section, and then after that sort of wall in the middle, only the high priest could go in. And then in that thing that looks like a door, that is the Holy of Holies, and only the high priest can go in, and that's only one day of the year. So the whole building is built as a way to get closer and closer to what the Holy of Holies is. And there's definitely, just look at the weight of the stone. I mean, the barriers here are tremendous. And did you have another one? Just one other interesting thing, I can't quite see where it is, but there's a big curtain. So in the littlest part where the high priest can actually get in, there is a big curtain that covers, so even when the high priest comes, it's hard, I'm not sure they can even go in. But when Jesus was crucified and the curtain was torn, this is what they were talking about. The big curtain in the temple was torn from top to bottom, and now the Holy of Holies is available to all of us. I think that's the main thing I want to say.
Can I add something? Use my, in voice or something like that. Priest voice, there you go. What's interesting, you remember Philip the deacon and the eunuch he met on the road? And he baptized said eunuch. The eunuch had come, he was reading from the book of Isaiah. And Ethiopians have been Jews for many years. And he had come to worship at the temple. But because he was a eunuch, he was not allowed to pass the gates of the temple. So the women, there's actually a court called Nashim, which is the old Hebrew word for women. The women could get in there, but he couldn't get past that. Yeah, so it's a lot of strictness when it comes who gets access closer and closer to the Holy of Holies, right?
And just one other thing I'd like to point out is how big and heavy and rigid all this is, and what Jesus said at the end of this quote is, I long for you like a hen longs for the brood of the babies. I mean, this very feminine image when he's talking about this giant temple. I mean, I can't talk and use my hands at the same time.
Yes, so in this passage, we also see a kind of pairing of a fox and a hen, right? At the beginning, you see in Luke 13, 31 to 35, he says, at that very hour, some Pharisees came and said to him, "Get away from here, for Herod wants to kill you." And he said to them, "Go and tell that fox, behold, I cast out demons and perform cures today, and tomorrow and the third day I finish my course." So Jesus, remember, we through Lent, we're moving towards Jesus' death and resurrection. And he's kind of telling them that's what's happening. I'm going to finish my course. I read an essay focusing on the word finish there. But he's comparing the fox then later to this image, right? He's kind of bemoaning. He's saying, "Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, killing the prophets and stoning those who are sent to you." Again, telling them what's going to happen to himself. He says, "How often would I have gathered your children together as a hen gathers her brood under her wings?" So I found this painting, not very well-known painting, by an artist named Cherubini, Andrea Cherubini, Hen and Chicks, from 1867. And it shows the hen as Jesus, right, protecting her chicks. And as Ginger says, I guess maybe a more feminine image. Can we turn the lights down a little bit? Just.
I got it.
You might be able to see the image a little bit better. I like the stony stare of the hen. But if you go to a museum and you see this image, you might just think, oh, it's just a barnyard image. But it is, but it's also, I think, illustrative of that passage in the Gospel. So now we're going to move to the third week, and this is the parable of the fig tree. Who would like to read that? Young Phil.
Luke 13, 6 to 9.
And he told this parable. A man had a fig tree planted in his vineyard, and he came seeking fruit on it and found none. And he said to the vine dresser, Lo, these 3 years I have come seeking fruit on this fig tree, and I find none. Cut it down. Why should it use up the ground? And he answered him, Let it alone, sir, this year also, till I dig about it and put on manure. And if it bears fruit next year, well and good. But if not, you can cut it down.
So I'll show you 2 images of this passage, related to this passage, and then we can talk about the parable. This is from an artist named Urs Graf, G-R-A-F, Graf. It's called Fig Tree. It's a woodcut from 1515. And the other is by Andrew Wyeth's dad, right? This is the illustrator N.C. Wyeth. And so you see in the foreground there is the owner of the vineyard, and with the tool at the back in the back right is the vine dresser, and the fig tree is in the middle. So what do we take away from this parable? I love parables, talking about parables in the Gospels. What do you take away? What do you say? What is it about? Frank.
Continue to make the effort.
Continue to make the effort, right? This fig tree is not giving any figs. Let's just cut it out. And the guy's like, oh wait, give it 1 more year. And then if it doesn't produce, then we can cut it out.
It's a different word, it's tending the soil.
Say again?
It's tending the soil to help it grow. You
Tending
can't
the
just
soil,
expect it,
give
it
it a
needs to be.
chance, right?
Actually, I think the Lent reading for today from the booklet was about gardening and having to tend the soil first, and you need to prepare the soil, and that's where things will grow. You don't just plant something and wait for it to pop up. It takes
Right.
time.
Right, tend to the soil. Some readers of this are very specific about the meaning, right? That the guy at the left, the owner of the vineyard, is God. Right? The vine dresser, the guy at the right, is Jesus. So God and Jesus are having a conversation about us, right? Jerusalem, the fig tree is Jerusalem, or individually us. I don't know if you have to be that hard and fast about assigning meaning to the various figures, but you could read it that way. And that it's about one more chance, right? This idea of, I don't know, unless you repent, you will perish. Something like that. If you had to own one of these two, which one would you own? They're quite different, right? One's colorful, beautiful, the other is very
Did you say?
hard-edged and
Did you
wood.
explain the size of this?
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry, it's interesting, again, this is something like 1 by 2 inches. It's like, it's a tiny woodcut. that, I think this might be in the New York Public Library, it's just a little, tiny little print, woodblock. And you see that the halos on the left are piled up, like, because halos, before the High Renaissance, halos are like this and not like this, right? This is 14th century, 15th century, 16th century, so they're kind of piled up so you can't see anyone's face for all the halos. Off to the left there. Okay, so we move to the 4th week, coming up, 4th week of Lent. We have a reading which Roger will do from Luke 15, I think it's 1 to 3 and 11 to 24.
The fourth Sunday reading, Luke 15. Now the tax collectors and the sinners were all drawing near to hear him. And the Pharisees and the scribes murmured and saying, "This man receives sinners and eats with them." So he told them this parable. There was a man who had 2 sons, and the younger son said to his father, "Father, give to me the share of the property that falls to me." And he divided his living between them. Not many days later, the younger son gathered all that he had and took his journey into a far country. And there he squandered his property in loose living. And when he had spent everything, a great famine arose in the country, and he began to be in want. So he went and joined himself to one of the citizens of that country, who sent him into his fields to feed swine. And he would gladly have fed on the pods that the swine ate, and no one gave him anything. But when he came to himself, he said, "How many of my father's hired servants have bread enough and to spare, but I perish here with hunger? I will rise and go to my father, and I will say to him, 'Father, I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Treat me as one of your hired servants.' And he arose and came to his father. But while he was yet at a distance, his father saw him and had compassion, and ran and embraced him and kissed him. And the son said to him, 'I have sinned against heaven and before you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son.' But the father said to his servants, 'Bring quickly the best robe and put it on him, and put a ring on his hand and shoes on his feet, and bring the fatted calf and kill it. And let us eat and make merry, for this my son was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found,' and they began to make merry." The word of the Lord.
Thank you.
And so, thank you, Roger. Now, I'll show you some images of this parable of the prodigal son. The first is by the great 20th century black artist Aaron Douglas. This is from 1927. And it's at the Virginia Museum of Fine Arts. And you can see the prodigal son there in the middle. He's got his cash. He's out on the town. There's music, trombones coming down from above. He's dancing. There's a $1 bill, and there's some playing cards in the lower right. So he's gambling, he's dancing, he's partying. Everything's good for the prodigal son. And this, I just want to show you this. The same image is in a tiny gouache. This is a kind of opaque watercolor at the Beinecke Rare Book Library at Yale University. This is, of course, much smaller than the painting. This is probably, 6 by 10 or something like that inches. And then Albrecht Dürer takes a different moment in the story we just heard. What moment does he take? Yeah. I think Dürer picks a good moment here because it's the prodigal son among the pigs. 1496, it's at the Metropolitan, and it's an engraving. And this is when he's run out of money, right? He's feeding the pigs, and he would be happy to eat what they're eating. So he's been given this money from his dad. He goes out in the world, he squanders it all, and then this is his fate at the moment. I don't know if you saw the movie Hannibal, but there's some terrible scenes in there with pigs like that. So this makes me think of that, and it makes me wonder if the makers of that movie didn't know this print. I don't know that, I'm just speculating. So now farther along in the story, this is Rembrandt's, again, a very tiny pen and ink. It's just a pen and ink drawing by the great Rembrandt of the return of the prodigal son. And you see the other brother there in the background. Look at the look on his face. Right? This, in my life, this has been me. Right? I was the oldest in my family. I tried to be the good son. I wasn't always the good son, but when I wasn't, I didn't get caught. Some of my brothers, particularly my brother Craig, had a very difficult adolescence. And it seemed to me he was getting away with murder. And that was the look on my face. It was like, Dad, seriously? Again? Craig, he's 14, he takes the car for a ride and nothing happens to him? Come on.
It's not fair.
It's not fair. So, let me give you the date. Rembrandt's obviously 17th century. This is from 1630. 1642. And it's in a small museum in Haarlem in Holland. And we'll come back now. So I'm going to show you a few Rembrandts because it's very important, obviously, to this artist to do religious work, and particularly the prodigal son. So here we have a drawing by Rembrandt. And here's an etching. You see it signed at the lower center, Rembrandt 1636. The same subject, right? The return of the prodigal son. And you see the other brother, where is he? Above, looking out the window. Again, not too happy with this great reception that his father gives to this brother of his who's not behaving very well. But both the drawing and the print are quite small. So this is 1636. Rembrandt lives to 1669, and right toward the end of his life, he does this painting. Same subject. Right? Rembrandt, throughout his whole life, is coming back to the prodigal son. This is in the Hermitage in Moscow, and it is 1666 or 1668, again, Return of the Prodigal Son. And so it has this typical, very dramatic lighting that Rembrandt gives us, and you see that it's spotlighting one of the feet of the prodigal son, which is bare. His father is wearing kind of elegant clothes in contrast to the torn clothes of the prodigal son who's returned. Here's some details. Now, if you can see that, there again is the rather jaded look on the brother's face. Not overjoyed. So, here's a question my dad used to ask. Who was the least overjoyed at the return of the prodigal son? It was the fatted calf. It's not the brother. The least overjoyed at the return of the prodigal son was the fatted calf. But the brother's not happy either.
Somebody actually answered that.
I think I've told that joke before. There's a detail of the face of the father. And so you think that the parable maybe is telling us to be merciful beyond when maybe we should. Mercy on mercy. I mean, is he foolhardy or is he wise? The father of the prodigal son.
I think he's wise.
You think he's wise? Why do you say that, Frank?
Because we are to love one another.
Right. Right, we're to love one another, Frank says. And there's somewhere it says to forgive 7 times 70.
It's also about repentance. I mean, the prodigal son repented.
The prodigal son is
And we're
repented.
told if you repented, you'll be forgiven.
Okay. So then I have 2 other examples of the prodigal son. I picked them, I mean, again, this is 17th century, so let's move forward one more century. This is the 18th century, a painting from 1773 by Pompeo Battoni, not a household name, B-A-T-O-N-I, Battoni, Return of the Prodigal Son, 1773, but I picked it because of the stark contrast between the clothing of the 2 figures, right? Again, you see the father in this great finery receiving his son in this kind of tattered outfit. And he's almost like a house, right? He receives his son in his arms as if he's kind of enclosing him, protecting him.
It's like the hen.
It's like the hen. It's like the hen. It's also like one of the great eulogies I've ever heard at our church, which is when Ted Brown died, his brother came and gave the eulogy. I don't know if you remember. I'll try to tell this without crying. He just said, he was talking about his big brother Ted. He said, we went to the Rolling Stones concert, and we had terrible seats. But Ted always said, okay, wait for the moment. And the moment came, and we rushed down, we cut through, and all of a sudden we were at the stage. And this is Ted's younger brother saying, I was 14 years old, I was scrawny, and I was looking up at Mick Jagger, and the crowd was crushing in on us, and Ted, he just protected me. He just had his arms around me, keeping the crowd away from me, like that. One of the great eulogies I've ever heard. And it's about 2 brothers. And here's one last prodigal son. Also, not somebody really maybe know, Bartolomeo Esteban Murillo, M-U-R-I-L-L-O, Murillo, Return of the Prodigal Son. This is back to the 17th century. It's at the National Gallery in Washington, 1670. I show you this because we have all the characters here. You know, you can see the good son is at the back, looking again at his dad, and the prodigal son, his brother. Everybody's happy though, except for him, right? And there's the fatted calf at the left. And there's a guy with an axe there, right? And the little kid happily bringing the calf in, the calf unaware of his fate. But the dog is happy and the father's happy. And you see the attendants there have, fresh clothing and a beautiful ring. And so they're receiving the brother with what some people think is more than he deserved.
Jim,
Yes.
in the previous slide, to me, when I looked at it, the shirtless son could also almost be the crucified Christ being wrapped by God.
Now, why do you say that? I like that reading. Why do you say that?
Because he's unshirted. So, Christ was stripped of his clothes. And you wouldn't, the prodigal son, can't imagine walking around the countryside shirtless. So there's a reason he doesn't have a shirt on.
The prodigal son is one of my very favorite parables. And now we have the last one, which goes to the Gospel of John, which is next week. Who's going to read that?
This is John 12, verse 1 through 8. 6 days before the Passover, Jesus came to Bethany, where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. There they made him a supper. Martha served, and Lazarus was one of those at the table with him. Mary took a pound of costly ointment of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the ointment. But Judas Iscariot, one of his disciples, he who was to betray him, said, "Why was this ointment not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor?" This he said not that he cared for the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to take what was put into it. Jesus said, "Let her alone. Let her keep it for the day of my burial. The poor you always have with you, but you do not always have me."
So this parable, or this story I have found, there are a number of paintings, but here it is in stained glass. And you see Jesus on the left, and you see Mary at the center, and at the right there's Judas. This isn't, this isn't as common a subject as picked up, but you do find it, and I like this one. It's in the musical Jesus Christ Superstar, right? That there's the line, why has it been wasted? We could have raised 30 silver pieces or more. People are hungry, people who are starving matter more than your feet and hair. It's kind of a hard teaching, right? That Jesus said there will always be poor. Right? It's kind of, I think it's a good impulse to say, we shouldn't, you get this all the time. Why are we spending money on, chocolate strawberries at Easter when we could give it to the poor, right? You have a certain amount of money, what are you going to do with it? So some people might say it's wasteful to use that valuable substance to wash Jesus' feet with it. But the passage also reveals that Judas has an ulterior motive, right? That he's the thief. So he's saying we could have gotten money for this because he's in control of the money box.
It also shows Jesus' understanding of the human condition.
Frank says it shows Jesus' understanding of the human condition. So anyway, all of this is just kind of a view for you to think ahead, in the weeks ahead. These are the Gospels that we'll read. These are the parables we'll think about. Dave was talking today about what we do in Lent, why we give up things, how we kind of conduct ourselves and re-examine ourselves in Lent. And this is all, of course, leading up to Palm Sunday, the Last Supper, and the Resurrection. This is, of course, Giotto's great fresco from the Arena Chapel in Padua, about 1305, 1306. And you see Jesus coming in here on a donkey into Jerusalem. This is just, it's one of many paintings in this chapel, which we've seen before, right? If you go to Padua, you can still see this, and it's many different scenes of the life of Christ. So, any questions about any of that? Any things you want to look at again?